Okay, YouTubers, this is Joe from Art Alien TV. Now today I'm just doing a quick update on some of the things I've been uploading to the Gigapan site, Art Alien TV Gigapan site. And basically we've got this image here, which is really cool. Now I initially did a video on this about 3 years ago, and it was called Millions of Mars Domes, and that was 2017, just over 3 years ago. And there's loads of crazy stuff in this video. And when you look at these things at certain angles, they really don't look like dunes. NASA calls them dunes, frosty dunes. I don't think they are. I think they're far too uniform, and there is no known wind process that would produce such a thing. And I've been doing a lot of studying recently on how dunes are formed on Earth and on Mars. The same processes happen on Mars, of course, but it's slightly different there because there's less gravity and the wind isn't as effective because of the low air pressure, but it's still very windy in some parts of Mars. And we get some very strange effects, and I've got some other images up here as well, some really weird stuff going on here. But first I'm going to show you this. Now, this is something I've been looking at for years and still I'm totally amazed by this. And these are supposedly frosty dunes. And when you look at it more closely, of course, they don't look anything like dunes whatsoever. And these are huge. This is to scale, and roughly to scale. It's not exact, but it's pretty accurate. These are absolutely massive, right? And they're rectangular. It almost looks like bubble wrap, or if you get a load of sort of pastry on a pastry dish and then chop it up slightly unevenly in lines and then bake it. This is what kind of happens. It's really odd. Now, I'm not saying that these are necessarily all intelligent structures, but they don't look like any sort of dune formations you would see on Earth. There was no examples of this on Earth, and this is absolutely amazing when you look at it, because you have these long lines of similarly sized rectangular structures, and they look eroded. They've got these black marks all over them, which is probably from the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Basically, there's loads of examples of images where you have these black smudges and marks on stuff, which is where you have frozen carbon dioxide on the ground causing black marks in the frost and snow or ice on these structures. Okay, I'll show you some more examples of that in a second, but this was just crazy. When you look at it on here, what I just rotated the image 45 degrees to the left, because when you get the image on the page, which is up here, you can link to it here. If you go to the NASA link, it's actually upright, and they don't look that interesting until you turn the image on its side and look at it in perspective. But basically you've got a load of them here which have all kind of started to break up here in this area, as if there's been some kind of landslide almost here. And then you've got some broken up here, and as if they've kind of subsided and sunken into the ground here. But basically this part here, they go right the way across. And this to me looks like some kind of city. Now, it may not be, of course, but one thing you have to realise about structures on Mars is that they don't necessarily conform to what we would call structures. In other words, I think they were making dwellings or houses that are a little bit more organic in shape and more natural in shape to blend in with the actual topography and with the other geology in the area. In other words, they're sort of semi-camouflaged in a way to make them blend in. And there are plenty of examples of that in this video. And this video shows a lot of the other domes in the Northern Hemisphere as well. There's some very strange processes going on here, and I don't think all of it is completely done by the wind and the weather. And we have all these millions of these brightly coloured domes up in the Northern Hemisphere here. This is on Google Mars. But I actually think a lot of these are not structures. I think a lot of them are, but I actually think a lot of them are, like I showed in my previous video, giant organic growths on the surface, like these giant veg. I call them giant veg for want of a better name. They may not be, but they got leaves and roots coming out, and they grow in groups. Okay, so I do recommend you watch this video, Mars Giant Veg. Oh my gourd. These are huge. These are 130 meters across, right? That's insane. That's 450 feet across, right? Absolutely huge. That's the size of a whole block of houses. And they look like giant tomatoes. I'm not saying they are tomatoes, but they have vines coming out of them, and they grow in rows along the ground and seem to be organic. And it's absolutely insane. So I recommend you watch that. I will put 1 or 2 clips of these in at the end anyway, just to show you, because I've taken some more clips recently of those, and I've darkened it up a bit, and they look absolutely incredible. So check that out. I will put a link to that video as well at the end, so you can click on that. But basically, I think a lot of these things here are actual structures that are built, metallic structures, but some of them I think are growing. Now, so we have this. I don't think these are growing. I think these are actual structures that are probably built into the ground by some sort of ancient civilization a long, long time ago, probably 1 million years ago, who knows. They may even still be active. But these are huge. If you look at the measure on here, these are absolutely huge. These are over 1,000 feet in length this way, right? And width-wise, they average around sort of 300 meters, which is huge, absolutely huge. So they're on average about 1,000 feet in size. Then there was this image and this image. Now this is the same area in the northern hemisphere, near these. Okay, it's not exactly the same area, but it's not far from it. It's within a few hundred miles of that area. We have these also called frosty dunes, right? Now, when you look at what it says, they're called seasonal frost on dunes. Now, I think there's more of a conventional explanation for these, because they conform to some of the dune structures we have on Earth. Although there's some very weird stuff going on here. When you zoom in, and these are huge images, when you zoom in, it's absolutely insane. I mean, it looks like spaghetti or something on the ground, and you've got these crazy dune structures in very high detail. You can actually see that the frozen sand here, and all these black marks, these black sort of smudges, are caused by melting carbon dioxide, okay? Because carbon dioxide also does freeze. Not at the same temperature as water, but it does. And when it defrosts, it leaves these kind of scars everywhere, which are in themselves very interesting. And many people have shown images before of these scars on the surface, saying they were trees or shrubs. And some of them do look like trees and shrubs, but I don't think these are. But look at this. I mean, this is absolutely insane. And what amazed me about these was not only the actual complexity of the shapes we got here, which are very, very complex. We have some that are doing some rather strange things here, which don't quite make sense in the normal sense of what you would call a sand dune or frozen sand dune, okay? This one here was really weird. We've got complex shapes here, joining up, and then some go under and some go over, right? So we got overlapping examples here, where this one here comes from below and up and over this one, which goes across, right? And there's multiple examples of this in here. I've only marked a few of them. There's some here which seem to go over and under each other. Now, how would a dune do that? You would assume that the dunes were formed roughly at the same time, and the sand sort of blew along and then made these interesting shapes, and then as winter came along they froze, okay, probably froze very quickly, and a sort of semi-hard surface would form on the dunes here. But how would this dune here go under and up here, and this one goes over it and then round here, like that. It's absolutely insane. And when you start looking at these, it's mind-boggling what's going on here. Absolutely mind-boggling. And what's really cool is there's even one of them, I'll show you in a minute, actually, that is doing some other weird things as well. There's another example here where this lower one comes up and over this one that's going across. There's multiple examples of this. Now, that just doesn't happen on Earth. It really does not happen. As far as I know, and I've been doing quite a lot of research into this recently. I've been getting right into this dune research and trying to work out what we're looking at, because I really don't think that NASA are explaining these things in enough detail, and they often gloss over things or don't explain anything and say absolutely nothing about them. They just give a name to an image, either frozen or frosty dunes or dune fields or whatever, and that's it. That's all you get. You don't get any explanation as how they're formed, and you don't get any real info about what's going on. And as I have shown before in previous videos, like the Mars vine plants, one I did recently, a lot of these dunes aren't actually dunes. They are vines on the ground, which are growing along the surface like weeds that grow in long lines, and they have branches coming off them, and they may have sand over them, which is then frozen and frosted up and formed a sort of crust. But underneath some of these dunes, I'm absolutely certain there are plants growing on the surface, and the sand actually acts like a form of insulation for them and keeps them warm and stops them completely freezing up. Okay? And as on Earth, some of these organisms and plants may actually have antifreeze in them, like some animals do on Earth. There are types of toad and other animals that can defrost and come back to life. So it is possible on Mars that something very similar is going on. And what was interesting about this one is I've got another version of the same image here. Now, this was taken about a week later, this one. It's the same area, and it's got a lot of the same features, and there's very little difference, in fact, in the dune shapes. They haven't changed much in the course of a week or two between them. It's got the date on here. Let's look at the date. That's the 23rd of February, and this one, hang on. Yeah, the 7th. So actually, it's almost, it's like a couple of weeks later, this is. Now, this one is almost the same. Some of it has melted. You can actually see here, down here, that some of it's melted a bit, just here. But what's really cool about this one, there's one here that goes all the way across the image, and you can actually follow it, which is quite a fun thing to do if you're sad like me. It's like one of those puzzles you get at Christmas where you have a little ball bearing thing and you've got to kind of go through the maze. It's like that. Basically, this one here goes all the way across the image. You can actually follow it from one side of the image here, in this corner. You follow it up here. It goes all the way to the other side. It kind of comes up here, and it joins up to all this here. It starts to fizzle out there, but it's still joined to that. Then it comes up over here, joined to all this stuff. And it goes right up here, and you can follow it all the way to the end of the image, right up here. And there's a couple that do that, and that's not the best one. There is another one, which I can't find right now, but you may be able to find it. There's one here that goes all the way across, and is absolutely insane. And the details in here are unbelievable. You can zoom right in, and you can see the little individual ripples on the sand here where it's frozen, and in the ground, the frosty ground. There's some amazing detail here, absolutely incredible. But I do wonder, as I said before, if some of these aren't just dunes. Because if you look at the way they branch off from each other here, which doesn't really conform to even mixing, say, star dunes and transverse dunes, if you mix some of these together, you do get some interesting shapes. But I'm really struggling to work out how these actually formed in this pattern here. Because logically, you would think, well, the longer ones here, the wind's obviously blown in this direction and pushed the dunes along, and then they become frozen, and then some of them have defrosted and broken up. And you have little parts of dunes here, which are a bit like these Barton dunes, kind of. You can see how those are forming on the ground. But then you have this kind of spaghetti here. And I wonder whether some of this is organic growth underneath these dunes, and it's branching off like vines on the ground. And like in the video that shows the tomatoes, or I call them tomatoes, the giant gourd type things that I found recently, you have vines on joining those together. Okay. Now, as you can see on this image, this is the one I showed in the Mars gourd video. These are gourds, right? These are not dunes. You have all these fruit or vegetables, whatever you want to call them, on the ground. These are not dunes, right? They've got leaves, they've got vines coming out, and this one here, this double one, this is a twin here, has a vine coming out of it here, it goes up here, and it joins to these up here. And these then join up here as well, and then you have others that join together, but some of them have sand blown over them, which is then frozen, perhaps. Okay? So this is an example here, where I've darkened this one up a bit more so you can see these much better. These are incredible. These are not dunes. You can actually see that these are some kind of growth on the ground, like fruit or vegetables, like gourds or something similar. And these are huge. Over 100 meters in size, a lot of these. Some are about 100, some are a bit less, some are a bit more. And there's double ones like this with vines coming out, joining them up. So that says to me that we really need to be looking at a lot of these dune fields on Mars in a different way. And these need to be studied a bit more carefully and a bit more closely, because I really think we're missing a trick here. And these may also be the reason for the methane spikes that we get on Mars. Every year on Mars, there's a huge spike in methane, which is unexplained, and NASA have fobbed it off and said, oh, we don't really know where it's coming from. Although they have kind of narrowed it down. They picked up this methane every year since they've been up there, right? Since the mid to late 70s, and since the Viking missions. And they've never really explained it. And I think a lot of these so-called dunes on the ground are not dunes at all. I think they are vines. Some of them may be a type of fungus that are growing on the ground. And I think, not necessarily here, but in some cases, some of this stuff may well be not just sand and dunes with dark scars from the carbon dioxide, but I think some of these may actually be vines growing along the ground, and that would explain some of the very complex and very strange, complex structures and branches that we have here. Because it's very hard to explain these just by working out the wind direction, because you can obviously see that some of them may be just from the wind, but how did they form such complex, overlapping structures? And dunes don't go under and over each other, and a lot of these do, especially on this one here. You can see up here where they sort of go under and over each other, like this. And I think a lot of this stuff, especially these giant gourd type things that are growing on the ground, could explain when these die off. These may only last a year or two, these things, when they grow. They may be fairly transient. When these fruit die off, if that's what they are, that would cause the spike of methane gas in the Mars atmosphere, which they've been fobbing us off about for many, many years, since the 1970s. And I think this may be the reason for it, or at least part of it. It is possible, because these are not just dunes. Dunes do not have vines that come out and join together. And luckily for us, I managed to find some images of them that aren't completely covered in frosty sand, like a lot of them are. I mean, these are absolutely incredible. I mean, have you ever seen a sand dune with leaves coming out like this, or vines coming out of them, going into the ground? No. And you can see here where some have joined up here, and they've joined into sort of long lines here. Now that's vine. You can see a vine coming out of that. Look at this. That's a vine. But sand's blown up against it and covered some of it up. But it goes right along here. That isn't just a sand dune, right? So there's some very weird stuff going on here, and I really do think a lot of these are kind of giant veg or fruit growing on the ground, seed pods of some sort. They may be a type of fungi that we've never seen, and obviously we don't have plants that grow this big. In other words, fruit or vegetables that grow this large. But bear in mind that on Mars we have an atmosphere with 95 or 6% carbon dioxide, which could mean that plants could grow absolutely huge and a lot lower gravity. So there we are. That was it really. So I recommend, I'll put links to these gigapans in the description below and in the comments as well, so you can flick through these yourself. There's loads of weird stuff going on here, and I'm really sure that these especially are not dunes. These are some kind of fruit or vegetables on the ground, or possibly fungi, with actual vines growing and joining these together. So these are fruit of some sort. You could call them fruit or veg, whatever. Seed pods with flesh probably inside them and water inside them, which is probably drinkable. Okay? These could be giant weeds or vines growing across the surface of Mars, transient. They may come and go yearly or every couple of years. We don't know. But I've got examples here of the same dunes taken a couple of weeks apart. And you can actually see where they've slightly changed and melted. But that doesn't fully explain it. So thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you soon.